We have created short videos to summarize a book entitled Learning the Brainstem. The voice you hear is AI generated, as clear in pronunciation as we can make it. LTB 13 begins a tour of the medulla, otherwise known as the medulla oblongata. In the LTB series as a whole, we have worked from top to bottom of the brainstem if you followed the videos in their numerical order. In these two images, the left being higher than the image on the right, there is a conspicuous difference due to the appearance of a folded grey mass on either side of the midline. In the right image, in the right brainstem, the red arrow points to the folded grey mass to which I refer. Note that there is a resemblance between the inferior olive, to which the red arrow points, and the structure now indicated with the green arrow. Both appear corrugated or folded. The inferior olive is a reliable presence in the medulla, and you could say that if there is inferior olive anywhere, then you are in medulla there. The rule is not absolutely perfect, because there is medulla below the level of the inferior olive as one approaches the transition to the high spinal cord. We will get there soon enough. The insert MR image is there to remind you why we orient our axial sections the way we do. As you scroll through axial sections downward or caudally in the medulla, moving from the far left of the screen to the right, the dentate nucleus, a deep cerebellar nucleus, which we continue to indicate with a green arrow, is present, along with the inferior olive, which we continue to indicate with a red arrow. As we said, if there is an inferior olive, then you are in medulla. The same cannot be said of the dentate nucleus because, for example, in the left image, you visualize the dentate nuclei in dorsal cerebellar white matter, but your location is pons. Students sometimes confuse the dentate nucleus for the inferior olive. Maybe the confusion is justified because the inferior olive, indicated by the red arrow again, could be considered to be a ventrally displaced cerebellar nucleus. Fibers arising from one inferior olive will pass to the contralateral cerebellum, specifically its Purkinje cell layer. Back to our first picture of the medulla, now enlarged a bit. Let me insert a yellow wedge into the anterior median fissure, which will extend down the ventral surface of medulla to the level of the decussation of the pyramids at the junction of the medulla and cervical spinal cord. To either side of the wedge, the pyramids are conspicuous. I shade the right pyramid with a translucent oval. Notice that medial to the oval, more clearly in the right hemimedulla compared to the left in this image, there is grey matter that arcs around the blackness of the pyramid. This arcuate nucleus sends so-called external arcuate fibers around or lateral to the pyramid and lateral to the inferior olive. The fibers terminate at the lateral aspect of the fourth ventricle. The arcuate nuclei and its fibers are involved in control of breathing. Here we are at a slightly lower level, and the main work of this slide and the next is to orient you in anatomical space. Let me switch my attention to the left hemimedulla. The yellow wedge sits in the anterior median fissure. The red dot sits in the left pyramid. The blue dot sits in the left inferior olive. The black dot sits in a midline cerebellar structure that occupies fourth ventricular space. It is the nodulus of cerebellum. The orange dot sits in flocculus. The nodulus and flocculus together constitute the archiocerebellum, the phylogenetically oldest part of the cerebellum. Now let's look at the base of a whole brain. The yellow line sits in the anterior median fissure. The red dot sits in the left pyramid. The blue dot sits in the left inferior olive. We cannot visualize the nodulus because the ventral brainstem faces us, and we cannot see the fourth ventricle. The orange dot sits in flocculus. Our axial location is in high medulla, just below the pons. The lower border of the pons is indicated with a horizontal white line. There are lessons to be gained by looking at photomicrographs at relatively low power. These images are arranged from higher to lower medulla, going from the left side of the screen to the right. I draw your attention to a white matter structure that seems clearer in relationship to white matter around it, only as we pass lower in the medulla. I place pink dots on the inferior cerebellar peduncle in each image. Because the inferior cerebellar peduncle is a major afferent or ingoing pathway into brainstem and eventually to cerebellum, at the risk of some confusion, let me show how the inferior cerebellar peduncle ascends going from left to right images on the screen. If we examine a gross specimen of brainstem, the inferior cerebellar peduncle can be visualized as a knotted rope at the lateral aspect of the medulla. Note that the inferior cerebellar peduncle extends into pons, whose lower border is indicated by the grey line. So, in axial sections, we would expect to see the inferior cerebellar peduncle in pons. Its appearance as a rope, or restis in Latin, has given rise to an alternative name for the inferior cerebellar peduncle. It is also called the restiform body. In this image of low pons, in the left brainstem, we place a translucent oval around the inferior cerebellar peduncle, or restiform body, as it merges into the blackness of the middle cerebellar peduncle. In the medulla, however, the inferior cerebellar peduncle is distinct. I place a translucent circle in the body of the left inferior cerebellar peduncle. What fibre tracts pass through it? One tract is the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, which carries proprioceptive information from joints, tendons, and muscle spindles from one side of the body to the ipsilateral cerebellum. But the majority of fibres in the inferior cerebellar peduncle arise from elsewhere. I place a white dot at the hilus of the right inferior olive. In this video, I concentrate on the primary inferior olivary nucleus, which I have been calling just the inferior olive, but there are also accessory olives. Fibres will exit the hilus of the principal inferior olivary nucleus and will pass to the contralateral inferior cerebellar peduncle directly across the medulla. Olive to cerebellar fibres constitute the largest component of the inferior cerebellar peduncle. We have a little less than 2.5 centimetres to go in our tour of the medulla. Stay with us, and as always, thanks for watching.